Most of us can recall the opening of San Andreas, with that big bright sun shining down on us as CJ is told to get on the bike. However, PC players might remember this quite differently. I think it's well known that the PC version of San Andreas looks quite different than the PS2 version, arguably worse in a lot of ways. One hot topic has always been about the differences between the sun. It's significantly smaller and less intense on PC than it is on PS2, so let's investigate. So right away, one big issue with the sun in San Andreas is the fact that on PC, the Z-test for the corona of the sun was enabled, whereas it was disabled on PS2. This meant the corona particle effect seen from the sun was basically invisible on PC. This is a big reason the sun looks so different compared to PS2. However, even with the Z-test disabled, the sun is still way smaller than on PS2. Just to clear one thing up, you'll have also noticed the difference between the PS2 and PC color filters. On PS2, the color filter turns San Andreas into this warm Californian sun-soaked image, while on PC, the color filter is a lot cooler and arguably blander. The atmosphere of the game is completely changed, especially with the Z-test enabled on the sun like it is by default. You can use SkyGFX to restore the PS2 color filter on PC. However, this color filter doesn't affect the size of the sun as you can see here. The sun on PS2 is still way bigger when compared to PC, even with the PS2 color filter applied. If you played San Andreas on an ATI card back in the day or an AMD card now, the lens flare effect is completely missing from the sun. So some people were seeing the sun like this, and some were seeing it like this. It was also only discovered this year in 2025 that lens flare across all 3D era GTA games doesn't scale with resolution correctly. This includes lens flare from lights other than the sun too. So at lower resolutions, the lens flare was much bigger than it was at higher resolutions, which PC players usually play at. Silent Patch only just fixed this issue very recently across all 3 games. It'll be available in the next public release. Anyway, while the lens flare can change the look of the sun, and the correct scaling can make it seem a bit fuller, the sun itself clearly remains bigger on PS2. So you're probably thinking, surely there's a value that can just change the overall sun size. Well, there is actually. The game has a time cycle file which controls how the weather looks. This includes things like sky colors, world colors, far clip, also known as draw distance, and a value which controls the size of the sun. Each weather type can have different settings for specific hours of the day. However, despite what you'd expect, the PC time cycle file is basically identical to the PS2 time cycle file. There's only 2 differences between them. On PC, the 8 PM rainy countryside line in the time cycle is missing values at the beginning, which causes the entire line to be read wrong. So at 7 PM, rain in the countryside looks like this. And then an hour later at 8 PM, it looks like this. This is how it should look with the PS2 time cycle. The only other difference is the values at the end of each line for illumination, which is an ambient light source on vehicles and character models, is completely missing on the PC time cycle, although it still works once added back. Other than that, everything is the exact same for all the other weather types and how they look at specific hours. This includes draw distance and the sun size value. So why is the sun so much bigger on PS2? Well, here's the answer, and it's a bit odd. Because about 10 years after San Andreas released, someone discovered that if you copy the Seabed.ipl file from the PS2 version of the game to the PC version, the sun became the same size as it was on PS2. Now, this doesn't really make sense initially, because an IPL file is an item placement file. These files contain the coordinates for objects in the game world. So Seabed.ipl is where Rockstar placed the models which make up the seafloor within San Andreas. However, IPL files can have other sections in them that can be used to do things other than placing objects. For example, the size and coordinates of invisible cull boxes are stored in IPL files. These cull boxes can have properties to do different things. For example, the cull box under this bridge will disable rain effects when the player enters it. Another one of these sections in IPL files allowed Rockstar to create boxes around the map that can alter different aspects of the current time cycle when the player is in the box. And what do you know? The PS2 version of Seabed.ipl contains a time cycle section at the bottom that is completely missing in the PC version of this file. Rockstar used this section in this file to create time cycle boxes around each city in San Andreas, which you can see represented by this yellow and blue line. The main purpose of this specific box is to overwrite the far clip value from the game's main time cycle file when the player is within the box. You can see the difference when I toggle the effects of the time cycle box on and off. Here's an in-game example. The game's time cycle says the far clip for Los Santos on a sunny day at 12 PM is 800 meters, which is how it appears on PC. But when using the PS2 Seabed.ipl file, the time cycle box added in that file reduces the far clip to 450 meters all over Los Santos, despite the main time cycle file, even on PS2, saying the far clip should be 800 meters for that specific weather and time. The time cycle box at San Fierro reduces the far clip to 550 meters, and the time cycle box at Las Venturas also reduces the far clip to 550 meters. Now, what has this got to do with the size of the sun? Well, it turns out the sun in San Andreas is drawn at the game's far clip plane. Here's a clear example of what I mean. As we reduce the far clip, the sun gets closer and closer to the player, which makes it look bigger. By reducing the far clip down to 40 meters, we now have the sun almost right next to us. Very hot, very spicy. So when the far clip is higher, the sun appears smaller as it's literally further away from the player. When the far clip is lower, the sun appears bigger as it's literally closer to the player. So on vanilla PC, the sun looks like this. With the Z-test disabled and lens flare scaling corrected using Silent Patch, it looks like this. Use the PS2 Seabed file, which reduces the far clip, and you can get the size back. And top it all off with the PS2 color filter from SkyGFX, and you restore the PS2 atmosphere perfectly on PC. Fun fact, when you start a new game in San Andreas, this sunrise in Los Santos is unique to this specific moment. This is because when you start a new game, the game's script sets the weather to sunny countryside, which during normal gameplay only appears when the player is in the countryside. I cover more of these unique technical details in another video if you want to check it out. It's very possible Rockstar always intended for San Andreas on all platforms to have the far clip value seen on PC, as they specifically set those values in the main time cycle for each location. But when they couldn't get the performance they wanted on PS2, they decided to overwrite the time cycle far clip values by creating a time cycle box around each city inside Seabed.ipl and reduced it for each city to improve performance. This also means it's very possible the massive sun size on PS2 wasn't even intended, and the PC sun size is actually what they envisioned when designing all of the weather types in San Andreas. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.